on here and finding it. You see that? Do you have that? Yeah, there you are.
Yeah, and then.
No data available, huh?
Yeah.
Are you on Wi-Fi or?
No.
Okay, don't worry about it. Just your regular thing should take you there. Try it again a couple times. Probably be good.
What I need to do is tell Facebook it's okay to get cellular data.
Ah. Now there we go. All right, we're there. All right, let me share this.
Cellular data. There we are. Okay, here I am.
Alrighty, let me. Yeah, I'm so glad you weren't affected by those fires. This was just terrible watching that last night.
Mm-hmm.
Just horrible. And if you scroll up right here, let me show you. There's our shot right there. Yeah. We are sharing the show. Alrighty. Oh, nope, nope. All right, great. We have shared away. All right, let me go here. Let me go to All right, very good. Awesome.
All those Twitch viewers will be excited.
Yes, they will. All 0 of them. You know, I was watching the live streaming pros, and they were talking about Twitch. They go, "We have never had anybody watch on Twitch," and they finally got off it, so, which we should probably do too. But yeah, that's good. All right, we are having a watch party now on on-set lighting. Good. That's awesome.
So there's all these different streaming services and all these other things that are going on.
And let's talk about that. Yeah, I mean, it's a different world now, Ron. It's a complete different, it's a whole different dynamic, a whole different way that you approach it, or, you know, everything's going on. I mean,
it's scary and wonderful at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's certainly unknown.
Yeah.
I mean, we are nowhere near what any sort of point is going to be where the norm is there. You know what I mean? It's all very new, very, you know, cutting edge right now. And you know, the winners and losers, the survivors, you know what I mean? Who will that be? That is the next question. You know, I mean, when we were growing up at our age group, we would have thought, oh, of course they'll always NBC, ABC, CBS. I mean, that was it. That was it. That was it. They'll always be there. And now they're not anywhere near the powerhouses. I mean, it's Netflix. It's any number of different of these streaming channels that are coming up now.
Well, and as of November 1st, Apple's going full on into the fray.
Right,
They have
Disney.
some pretty incredible looking product coming out of the gate
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, Apple won't be number 2 on anything. They're going to be up at the top. They're going to be up at the top. I'll wave to my friends on the watch party here on Onset Lighting. That's great. Love having you. Dan just joined. Cato just joined. That's Eric is here with us. That is awesome, guys. Thank you so much. Really. Hey everybody, welcome. 2 o'clock, got to be Burnie's Applebox. And I am here with a very good friend today, Ron Sill. How you doing, Ron?
Good, Burnie.
Awesome.
Good to see you.
Thanks for dropping in. I really appreciate it, really appreciate it. You know, Ron is somebody that I met at Airy back, 10 years ago. It's hard to even say anymore.
Probably more than that.
It could have been, could very well have been. I know I was hanging with Bill Hoshevnikov then, and that's just around the time I think the Alexa came out too, is when we met. It may or may not have been. But Ron is somebody who got in back in film and production back in 1968. So he's the ancient mariner here. But we are very close in age to each other, and you know, I remember back in those days, and we're going to go into, you know, what some of your first jobs were, which were very cool.
Yeah.
And we just want to talk about the whole arc of what happened. So I wanted Ron here to kind of give us some perspective on back in the day and what Los Angeles was like to work in back in the 70s, right? The 70s.
I moved
80s.
out here in 1976.
1976, okay, very good. Back in the 80s and in the 90s and some of the transitions that you made then. And so I just wanted to give it a backdrop to what is happening now, which is just mind-boggling in the whole context. In fact, the whole industry, if you can even say it's come from, you know, story making, filmmaking, that type of thing, has the trajectory of something that I really believe no one could have predicted and no one did predict, you know. And where it's going, I think, is even more unpredictable, you know, of where it's going from here. So Ron, and we were talking at the beginning of the show and stuff, like, just tell us where you grew up first. Just give us some cliff notes on that.
Well, I grew up in Michigan, and and as soon as I got out of high school, I said, I'm done with a place that has snow. So I went to college in Miami at the University of Miami, and got involved with radio, TV, film production, communications, and
the reason was why? Why did you select that?
Well, it's an interesting story. I think my dad wanted me to go to business school because he was involved in real estate development and other things like that. And so I'm looking at the course catalog and seeing all the math requirements for business school, and I said, you know, math is not my strong subject. Radio, TV, film production. That sounds like something I've been interested in.
Sounds
having been
cooler.
Involved in drama club at high school and you know, putting on plays and all that sort of thing.
Right.
So, yeah, this looks good, and not a lot of math. So okay. And as I said to you earlier, the rest is history.
Yeah.
You know, here I am today.
He went down that road, yeah. And I know back in the day you were there. Tell me about your first job. You got your first job. Where was it? Just give me the short stuff.
Well, I was still in college. I was a junior, and I had been involved with you know, the TV film production classes, and I actually was a student assistant professor, showing people how to use the equipment and that sort of thing. You know, people would come down to Miami during the winter to do commercials, and you know.
Sure, that was a big thing. Come from New York, go to Miami, do that, right? Take a week down there, and it's like a vacation.
Yeah. Well, an Italian company showed up to do a Chiclets Gum commercial.
Okay.
And they didn't know anybody, and so they came to the University of Miami to look for, you know, people to help out.
Some bodies, yeah.
And so my first actual physical job was at the Orange Bowl Stadium, making a chiclet scum commercial for Italian television.
TV. Okay, great.
Not long after that, a guy I knew, his name's Mike Lang, who you may recognize went on to produce Woodstock, was doing a rock festival in Miami called the Miami Pop Festival. It was May of 1968. And since I had access to the equipment at the University of Miami and knew Michael, I said,
Sure.
hey, why don't I come and shoot some film at this concert? Well, I had a limited amount of film stock, and so I saved my few reels of film for the headliner, which was Jimi Hendrix.
Oh my gosh, that was your second job?
That was my second job, and it ranks probably in the top 3 jobs that I've had my whole career.
Oh my
And
gosh.
it still was, my feet were still wet, and I was wet behind the ears.
And you're shooting Jimi Hendrix, right from the stage, right?
And what's really interesting about that is I never saw any of that footage until it was released in a documentary on PBS called Hear My Train A-Comin' in 2003.
Wow.
And it blew me away.
Yeah.
Just
What were your thoughts seeing it? After all that time, what were your thoughts seeing that? Because you had had a mental image, and I know when you're shooting, of course, you're thinking about 1,000 different things. Where am I standing? Where am I standing next? What shot am I giving? How's my frame? All that.
Mainly, when you're looking through that viewfinder, you're thinking about the framing. At least that's where I came from.
Oh, no, you should be. Yeah. And what was your feeling? What was your impact? What was the impact on you when you saw it in 2003, or when you finally saw it?
I was amazed that it was as good as it was. Because, I didn't have a whole lot of experience behind the camera at that point. I had made student films for people that, were doing their graduate projects and that sort of thing. So, I said, gee, I wished I had access to this a whole lot sooner.
Yeah, and then you told me after that the same guy went on to produce Woodstock, as you said.
Yeah.
But you didn't do it. Why didn't you do it?
Well, I had just graduated from the university in June of 1969, and I had been asked to teach filmmaking at the high school that I had gone to. It was a private school outside of Detroit. And so I said, well, sure, I'll be happy to do that.
Yeah.
Because Michael hadn't been really talking about Woodstock very much. He had been planning to do this big show at the end of the summer in August.
Right.
But,
and you didn't have a lot of experience. You weren't thinking in terms of, you were thinking, oh, no, I've got a job. That's great. Right? Yeah. So it happened, but you weren't there on this one. Yeah.
All my friends were there. And
so tell me about this, because I've had so many regrets in my life. How long did you actually beat yourself up with that?
Oh, I don't know, on and off until yesterday.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, it depends upon how you wake up that morning. It's
exactly.
Oh yeah, no, I got you. So then you were working there. Give me sort of the idea too. At that point, you worked in Miami for a while after that, I assume.
Yeah.
And then what brought you out to California? How did that transition happen for you?
Well, Miami never really evolved at that time into a production hub that we all thought it would. And it came to the point where I had to make a choice. If I want to advance in my career, I go to New York or I come to LA.
Okay.
Well, it was pretty easy for me because New York had cold and snow.
And you'd already decided you did not like that.
But also I had relatives and family out here in LA. So
that makes it a little
made
easier.
it a lot easier.
Yeah.
I also had clients out here.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. I had been, a lot of what I did in that period that I lived in Miami was worked for network sports shows.
Okay.
ABC Wide World of Sports,
Sure.
CBS Sports
Which was the
Spectacular.
big kahuna.
Yeah.
You know, people don't, I think, remember that these days, but ABC Wide World of Sports,
That was it.
that was must-see TV.
Yeah,
You
every
know.
weekend.
Yeah, yes, absolutely, absolutely. That was a water cooler type show where you talked about what you had seen on that, because there was always a lot of drama on that show.
Yeah.
You know, that was a very well-produced show. I mean, even the opener of that guy going off the ski jump, that was like you had to see that every week because you couldn't believe what you were seeing, you know?
The agony of defeat.
Yes, the agony of defeat, that's right.
Yeah. So I was still in the camera department at that point.
Okay,
And I'd prep cameras on a Thursday, and
Okay.
we'd travel on a Friday, and Saturday and Sunday we'd do motocross and Reno air races and skiing.
were you traveling all over the country
I was
then?
traveling all over the country.
Wow, and how old were you about that time?
22, 23.
You had died and gone to heaven then. Yeah, yeah.
So we'd work on the weekends and have all weekend off to goof, all the week off to goof off.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
do commercials, which
Yeah.
was the other thing that you know was
Do some
happening in
local
Miami.
commercials in Miami there, and yeah, exactly, exactly. So then it was all going pretty good for you. How old were you when you came out to California?
Let's see, 25.
25. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
And coming out here, had you been to California before? You said
Oh,
you
yeah.
had relatives.
Yeah, ever since I was a little
Okay,
kid.
so you had a feel for the place.
I remember
anyway,
the San
yeah.
Fernando Valley when it was all orange groves.
Yeah, wow.
And down here in this part of town,
This
I mean,
was all orange
This was
groves.
orange groves
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
I went to Disneyland when it opened up,
Yeah.
and it was surrounded by orange groves.
Yes, yes, yes. That's something we share in common. I went
Yeah.
that first day too. That was very interesting.
Yeah.
So when you came down to California, and now you've had some experience in the industry, and walking into what is still probably Mecca as far as movie production goes, you know what I mean? What was the reception like? How did you feel? Was it easy for you to penetrate because of some of the experience you had, or was there a wall around it? Was it tougher to get into?
It was a little bit of both.
Okay.
It depended on what you were trying to do at the time.
Right.
Because I had, you know, these clients doing sports TV, surfing shows, and all that sort of thing. I had fairly regular work.
Right.
But as far as breaking into other aspects of the business, not so easy.
Yeah.
Because I also liked working on commercials because that's what I had cut my teeth on.
Sure. Sure.
Starting out in the business in Miami. And there were a lot of commercial production companies in the area, and fortunately for me, they were affiliated with the NABIT union, which I had been a charter member of the Miami local,
Okay.
part of New York's Local 15.
Okay.
And so I at least had an in,
Right.
and was able to at least have the credentials that they were looking for,
Right.
to be able to break in. But, you know, as with most of those things, you have a set crew. You have a certain group of
course,
guys, a
of
core
course.
group, and to break into that is difficult. And it usually happens when someone moves up or moves out or
A
whatever.
change or an
happens.
expansion
Yeah.
of the workflow. So, and back in that day, it was probably much more union orientated. I mean, I don't feel
Oh,
like
yes.
it is now. I mean, I feel like the unions sort of don't want everybody either. You know what I mean? It's not, I mean, there's so many people out here. I just don't see functionally how it could be all unionized, frankly. But back then, it's much smaller, it's much more closed group, much smaller community. So then being in the union was much more important than it is today. Would you say that's true?
It depends on where you want to go in the business.
Yeah.
It really
Okay.
does.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was more so then because the business was much smaller.
Right. Right.
Very
right,
much smaller.
Right. Right. You could almost name the people that were in it. If you knew somebody, you probably knew everybody one or two steps away.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
pretty
yeah.
much.
So you got in there, and how soon was it? I mean, that you were making a good living. I mean, like you were working 2 or 3 days a week. How long did that take, or was it pretty quick?
Well, it was pretty quick.
Good.
I was lucky in that respect because there were quite a number of folks who traveled out here from Miami around the same time I did. You know, people who realized, as I did, that there wasn't a lot of opportunity where we were, and you had to go someplace else.
Right.
And fortunately, I had a certain number of contacts that I was able to survive
Yes.
when some of these other people threw in the towel and went back.
And did you know people from Miami out here that had moved from Miami and were out here already when you came out, or was it pretty cold for you? You didn't really have a lot of local contacts from your home base.
I had two friends.
Two friends.
Who
Okay.
were living here at the time.
Okay. So you kind of rely on them a little
Yeah.
bit for some maybe advice or direction, something like that. Yeah. I always, and I think the transition is much different now, even than when I made the transition back in the early 90s for me. I felt it was more open up. There was certainly easier for me to penetrate the market then. And I think it's even easier now. But then again, that depends on sort of where you want to go, just like back then. But an enclosed area there. So now you were out here, you were predominantly doing sports and some commercials, is that right?
Yeah.
How about the motion picture side of it? Where did you intersect it, and how did that happen?
Well, through contacts that I had,
Okay.
they would say, gee, we have some day player opportunities on a particular show, and
Were you active on that too? Were you calling people and saying, hey, I'm available this day, that day?
that was one of the weakest areas of my whole entire
It's the
career.
weakest
I
of
was
everybody's.
not the kind of guy
Yeah.
who picked up the phone and called people.
Yeah.
And believe me, folks, develop that skill if you can, because
Thank you.
it can make the difference between paying the rent
Oh, very
and
much. Yeah.
and
I think even more important now. I mean, back in the day, you knew if there was a player that somebody was going to ring your number sooner or later,
Yeah.
right? But these days, there is no more waiting for the phone to ring. You have to be proactive.
Yeah.
And now, a lot of that is taken up on social media. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? I see
Oh,
so
yeah.
many. I mean, I love the sites. Wade Courts and those guys. Wade is always out there throwing, saying, hey, I need 2 more players for this week, and stuff like that. A lot of people are. There's a lot of cross section. So I think that is very, very important.
Yeah.
So when you got in, and what types of films did you start doing when you got out? Did you ever work on a Corman film? Let me just
No.
ask you. No, you
No,
didn't
I
have that
didn't.
privilege.
No,
huh?
I
okay,
didn't.
Okay. So what types of films did you start working on when you were working on them out here?
Oh, let's see. Well, the interesting thing was I made a transition out of the camera department into lighting.
Okay. But tell me about that. How did that occur?
Well, because I had been a camera assistant primarily in Miami, that's pretty much what people knew me as when I came out here. And to be perfectly honest, I hated the job more than anything.
Really?
I never really wanted to be a camera assistant. I wanted to be an operator and move up to DP eventually.
Mm-hmm.
And the job of loading the magazines and threading the camera and following focus, and back in the day, film speed was slow.
Yeah.
Lenses were fast, and
Yeah.
everybody wanted to shoot wide open, which means really narrow depth of field, which made the camera assistant sweat bullets.
Yeah.
And let's face it, actors in acting school aren't taught how to hit marks necessarily, are they?
No, and even if you are, you're not going to hit the mark every time,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, it's not like that. It's not a machine.
Yeah. So all of that pressure just finally got to me.
Yeah.
And I wasn't moving up as quickly as I had hoped I would.
Yeah.
And some opportunities opened up for me in lighting.
This is about what year?
1980.
Oh, 1980.
81.
Okay. So you came out in 76. You started about 68, you said, right?
Yeah.
And then you came out in 76, so that was an 8-year period there. And then 76 to 80, that's a 4-year. Now you made your transition to lighting, which all sounds pretty reasonable to me, you know. So the transition to lighting, how did it occur? Was it happenstance or was it design? Were you trying to get into lighting specifically?
Well, I was sitting at the NABIT office over in Hollywood one afternoon and talking to the business agent, and she said, you know, we've got this new TV series. It was called Rags to Riches. It starred Joe Bologna. And, you know, there's some opportunities there. And she knew that I was looking to move up into electric. She said, go over there, talk to them. You know, they can probably at least give you some days.
Right.
And I did. And I did a few days, and everybody kind of liked me, and I got along real well with the crew, and they hired me on permanently.
That's great.
And so that was my introduction. And from there, the people that I was working with and some people that I met went on to other projects afterward and said, hey, come on along.
So you met, you got in, they liked you, you were somebody they wanted to spend 10 hours with, right? Yeah.
Or more.
Or more, usually more.
Yeah.
And then you sort of meet people, you kind of get your crew, and these people, you said, let's get Ron on this one.
Yeah.
Started bringing you on other sets. So you kind of had your loose group, I call it.
Right.
You know what I mean? A group of people that you know, and you may not be the first call, but you're the second or third anyway. Yeah, yeah. And so you were involved in the lighting then, and tell me what you learned about lighting. I mean, at that point, I think, you know, I always describe as lighting as voodoo black magic because if you've done it a while, it's not that difficult, but it's always different. You know, you can never go from one set to another set and say, oh, this is exactly what you do, because the scene's different, the situation's different, the environment's different, everything is different.
The texture's different, the colors are different, the
Every-
people are different,
yes,
everything
yes.
has to be treated as a unique situation.
Yes.
It may be very similar to something you've done before, and therefore it's easier
Yeah.
to set it up and do it.
Yeah.
But for the most part, you have to look at everything with fresh eyes.
With fresh eyes, yes. So tell me about that learning process for you in there. And what did you do? I imagine first, you know, and you told me about how you started. You started laying, wrapping cable, right? But I like anything else, you know, the guy who's the newest, he probably starts more on the grunt jobs, and then you go up. And how was the process of that learning for you? I mean, were you actively learning? Were people teaching you things? Were you just learning by observing or asking?
Well, it was a combination of all of those ingredients. I had learned a whole lot as an assistant cameraman because sitting right next to the lens,
Yeah.
you see the entire set, you see where the lights are,
Oh,
where
yes.
they're pointed, and, you know, then you go see dailies.
Oh,
and,
sure.
Oh, that's what, because that was there, it did this over here.
I didn't even think about that, to be
Yeah.
honest with you.
So
Yeah.
it was a perfect learning place for me.
Yes. Okay. Very good. Very good. And so, how did that knowledge transition for you? I mean, in the hierarchy, you were an electric, and then did you come up to be best boy or something like that, and then work best boy electric and that, and then when did you make the transition to gaffer?
Well, I was working with a really terrific guy, Walter Stewart, who came out here from New York, and he was working with two DPs,
Right.
Ronnie Latour and Bernard Salzman. Great guys. And every so often there would be a conflict. They would both be doing something.
Okay.
And so it was an opportunity for him to say, Ron, why don't you go work with Bernard on this particular show? And that's how I was making
And then
the
so you
transition.
came up to the gaffer level on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me about, now this is very interesting to me personally because, you know, I sort of came in the first electronic age with beta cams and stuff in the early 90s, you know, and intersected that way, you know. And of course, it was there before. I mean, that was in the 80s and stuff too. They were being developed and coming onto the market. But the old school gaffers, what was the process then? I mean, you talk about the dailies, and I've never seen a daily. I've looked at the monitor all my
Right.
career, right?
Right.
What is that process like? That workflow between the DP and the gaffer back in the day?
Well, it varied because sometimes a DP would be completely reliant on a gaffer to do all of the lighting.
Right.
And sometimes a DP would have a particular idea of how things would look, and he'd give you a plot,
Yes.
for example, or storyboards or something like that.
Yeah.
And say, you know, this is how I want to see things. You know, this is where I want the instruments. This is how I want to have the setup.
Mm-hmm.
So it would depend on
Yeah.
on the relationship between the gaffer and the DP.
Right. Right. The gaffer would I mean, I would just assume. And here's another thing that I don't know anything about, working with film stock. You know, I mean, the gaffer would know what stock you're using, everything like that. He'd have actually a lot more information to digest than a guy like me would these days out gaffing, because he had just a lot more mathematical information to deal with, right?
You knew that in order to get the exposure that the DP was looking for, you had to have a certain number of foot candles falling on the set at this particular point.
Yes, okay.
So you had to know that, well, I know that this particular instrument at this particular distance was going to give me that reading.
Right, right. So you had that in your hip pocket. You had that in your knowledge base. And so when you're looking at it, when you're looking at the distances or whatever, you're saying, this is what I need over here. And what was that instrument? Give me an idea of what was the workhorse light back in the day? What was the one that...
Well, it depends on where you are. Are you
Yeah.
inside or are you outside?
Right.
Is it a big set? Is it a small set? I
Right.
mean, if we're in a room like we're in right
well,
now...
don't judge it by this. This is micro.
But nevertheless,
Yeah.
you know, you and I talked about this earlier today.
Sure.
Films started being made outside the studio on
Right.
location, and you'd be in rooms like this,
Yes.
or smaller,
Yes.
or bigger, or
Yes.
with daylight coming in, or any number of things that you'd have to contend with.
Right.
So basically a package of equipment, it would be primarily tungsten,
Yeah.
and you'd have your Inkies, your 100-watt lights, you
Yeah.
have your tweenies, you know,
Mhm.
and
So 100, 650s.
mhm.
You have 1Ks.
1Ks, your babies, your baby babies.
Baby babies.
We're
Yep,
talking
yep,
about,
yep.
you know, different size
The nooks
lenses,
and crannies,
which
yeah.
gives you the different spread that you're looking for.
Sure.
I always fell down on the side of giving me the biggest lens for the
Of
instrument.
course. I think that
That was my
yeah.
personal thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you'd have your 2K juniors, and you have your 5K seniors,
Okay.
your 10Ks. And that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
You know.
Where would you go up to 20K at? Like if you wanted light coming in from the outside, you wanted
20K didn't show up in my early career.
Oh,
10K was the
really?
biggest light that I worked with for the longest time.
Okay. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. How about HMI? When did HMI really show up?
Well,
Make
HMI
an
started
impact.
showing up in my world in the 70s and early 80s.
Okay.
And it was
Okay.
pretty much LTM,
Okay.
and it blew me away.
Yeah.
Because here's something that gives me that daylight quality light
Mm-hmm.
that isn't burning 2 pieces of carbon that had to be changed every 14 minutes.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. So, what was the size of the LTMs when they came out? I mean, I intersected the 1200.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I honestly, when I started, I thought there was nothing other than a 1200 HMI.
Well, that's pretty much where it started out.
A 1200?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then went to 25s and
And then 4Ks,
4Ks,
and then
6Ks.
6Ks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And was 1200, could it handle a lot of different scenarios for the way they were shooting back then on film and stuff like that? Or I mean, did it hold enough punch for a lot of things? Or was it just
No.
like more, it was
No.
more of a smaller
yeah.
kind of thing. You didn't do a big scene. with
Which
it.
is why companies like Arri, for example, were going full on into working with Osram
Right.
to create a larger fixture that gave you more punch, that had more.
For those solutions,
Sure.
yeah. And we're going to talk about Arri, but just going back, it was mostly LTM. That was Arri actually producing a HMI light back in those days? Yeah. They did. And what was it? 1200 was the same size. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Actually, I believe they were one of the first producers of HMI lighting. But for some reason here in America, and it probably all had to do with marketing and introduction of product, LTM caught on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So maybe LTM was just on the right block in Hollywood to make that connection. Yeah, yeah. Which is funny. I think a lot of people don't understand that. This is a very local town.
Oh, very.
You know, you can be in the wrong town, the wrong city in LA County, as opposed to the right block in Burbank, right? Yeah, so it does vary that way. That's interesting. So you were working with those kind of general things. What would you do if you were outside, you've got tungsten light, how would you correct for that? What was it generally, was it gel?
Blue gel.
Blue gel,
yeah.
Full blue,
Full
right?
CTB, yeah.
Full CTB, and that was adequate.
Well, yeah, it served a purpose, and of
Yeah.
course, you know, the color timers back in the lab would have to, you know, do some
Play
correction
with it.
from
Yeah.
time to time. But
Yeah.
that was it.
That's wild. That's
And
wild.
it robbed a whole lot of light from you.
Yes, that full blue gel was just taking it out. So
Yeah.
you'd have to double up on things or use a 10K where you'd normally use a 5 and stuff like that.
And then you'd have to use the bigger sheets of gel on your 4x4 frames to get them farther enough away so
Yeah.
they didn't burn through.
They didn't burn through, yeah, yeah. Did you have anything like heat shield back then?
No.
Or there was nothing yet? Because that was kind of a NASA thing,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very, very interesting. So now when you were powering that set, what was that like? What was that process like? I'm assuming you had to have generators.
Oh,
right? Yeah. What were the generators like back in the day? Was it on a truck? Okay, so they bring it out like on a big semi-truck or something
Right.
like that?
Usually there'd be twin plants right behind the tractor, and then you'd have your 40-foot box with grip and electric equipment.
Okay, so it would all come in one. Yeah, it would all come in one. Interesting.
Or there were tow plants. I mean, there were
Yeah.
generators that would be towed behind a truck that could be dropped off in various different places, because from time to time, you know, we're doing big exteriors.
Yeah.
And we'd have to have lights, you know, a mile down the road over there. So you'd
Sure.
have to drop a generator off over there because the main set needed its generators
Sure.
here. And
And then you got B crew over there working that out, laying that cable and everything. Wow, what a time! So you had some big crews back in the day too.
Oh, yeah.
How big was a crew? What was say if you're doing your average show? What was sort of the standard? What do you start with? You know, I know you could expand and contract.
Sure. Basically, what I would look for was myself, my best boy, and at least 3 electricians.
But, okay. And what about grips? Or would that?
It was pretty much the same kind of grip crew.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
Key
yeah.
grip, best boy, and
So you would have about 10 on the crew. You would have that group of grip and then that group of electric right then. You know, now another thing, help me out with this because this is something, and Ed Phillips, God bless him before he passed away, I had a wonderful conversation with him a couple of years ago about the process. And this may have been after your time, I don't know. In other words, this may have occurred before you got out here. But there were certain stands that were for grips and stands that were for electric. And one of the big battles that Ed was involved in was making some of those you know, interchangeable between the two departments because they didn't want the two departments to interchange those.
that's where the name combo stand came from.
Combo stand. Okay, okay. Were you here when that was going on, or had that issue been settled?
That was kind of happening around the time that I got here.
Okay, okay. Which is fairly recent. That blows my mind. I would never have thought that. But that was all, you know, that made, I mean, Ed Phillips, it makes sense. Matthew's grip equipment, you know what I mean? He saw opportunity there.
Yeah.
You know, and did that. So, and that's where the combo stand came in. So the combo could be used either by grips or electrics, and that's why it's the combo stand.
Yep, had its junior pin,
Yeah.
so you could stick your reflectors in there.
Yeah, yeah.
or your 2Ks and up.
And it had, and it had a little, what would the
Internet.
affectionately called a Frisco pin sometimes,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. And you put it in there and you had your little adapter
Oh,
with
yeah,
a baby
yeah,
pin on it.
uh-huh.
Yeah. Interesting. So you're going through now, and once you got into the lighting department, this is about 1980s. Tell me about the 80s. What was the workflow like for you back then? Because that had to be somewhat of a golden age out here. You know, the cable menu was expanding on everybody's TV. Now they went from 3 channels to the heady number of 30. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there was a lot more, I'm assuming, production going on. You know, tell me about that. What was that like on the ground for you?
Well, for me, my bread and butter was TV movies of the week. What we
Okay.
used to call 18-day wonders.
Okay, 18-day wonders.
Yeah.
Why'd you call them that?
Well, you did 3 6-day weeks.
Okay, and that was it, huh?
Yeah.
3 weeks you pumped it out.
Yeah.
And that was all the principal shooting. In there.
Yeah.
Do you remember the names of any of them?
Oh, golly. There was the first one that popped into my mind was Baby the Bride, and one of the reasons I was so fond of that particular movie, I think that was the first one that I worked with Bill Bixby as a director.
Okay,
Phenomenal guy.
really?
Here's a guy who would walk out onto the set the first day of production and introduce himself to everybody. The second day, he knew everybody's name and would greet you on the set.
Wow.
And he was always really very well prepared. He had an excellent sense of humor, and that's something that was always very important to me.
Yeah.
You know, even in my own crew,
Yeah.
is if we're going to be working all of these long hours together, you better have a good sense of humor.
Yeah. You better roll with the punches,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And tell me this, and I think this is something, you know, I unfortunately wasn't here for that time, but there was an old Hollywood, and there's the Hollywood, I don't even want to say now, but then there was a new Hollywood. I think there's something different even going on now. But the old Hollywood, that was where a guy like Bill Bixby, who I really only know as an actor, you know what I mean? They would take care of the crew. That when they were there, they were the patriarch or whatever of the family, which was that crew, and know them like that, you know? You saw those days, right? Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. When
See,
do you,
it came out of the studios,
the studio system, right?
where you had, you know, your various different departments, and there was that core group of people who worked in that department. They were, you know, permanent employees for the most part,
Right,
and they would work from movie to movie.
right.
And so when that began to transition and things started opening up, and there was more non-union work being made, everything was starting to be made more on location, outside of the studio, things began to change and evolve, and there wasn't quite the same amount of loyalty, so to speak, that
Right.
that had existed before. So that was part of the transition that I experienced. And you'd build your own families.
Amongst your crew, right?
Yeah,
You could depend on those 5 or 6 guys to be available when you called.
pretty much.
And do that. Yeah, and I think that is sort of where I transitioned into it. And I really never did a lot of Hollywood or entertainment like that. I was actually on sort of a second wave of the whole industry, which was then cable TV generated. You know what I mean? Or VHS generated.
Right.
You know, which wasn't even, there weren't even, when you came out here, maybe it was just around the time that VHS was coming to the market, right? So you were involved with it well before even VHS.
Oh, yeah.
Because that was a huge transition. I don't think a lot of people understand that today. How revolutionary that was to be able to play a movie of your choice on your own TV at home when you selected to choose it, to show it,
Yeah.
you know. But so, you know, as long as you got it back to the video rental store in
Right.
48 hours, you know, all that. But that was,
Or you were willing to plunk down, you know, 30, 40 bucks to buy it.
yeah, right. No, true. And I remember the old video movie collectors who was like this was going to be an archive of their movies for the rest of their life.
Right.
You know what I mean? And of course, that didn't happen. So with that, you know, you're coming out in the 70s, you're working in the 80s, and it starts to change, and then you're working a lot of time. I mean, you are a guy now who's young, and when were you married? When did you start a family out here?
1982.
1982. So about the time you made that transition to lighting, you're working more with a crew, and then you get married and you start a family. And then how many days were you working in the studio or in LA as opposed to being out on the road into another location? Because locations became much more realistic, didn't they, at some point? Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, for the most part, in the beginning, most of my work was pretty much local. And as things began to evolve in terms of people recognizing that there was an awful lot of revenue that would come in from a production being done in your area. So various different states around the country started giving tax incentives to producers to come and spend a whole lot of money in their area.
And this is still around the 80s, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It pretty much began in the 80s.
Okay. Gotcha. So then the producers and the production companies, they're going, hey, well, we'll go out to Wyoming and film this and shoot it on the local streets of Jackson and all that stuff.
New Mexico was big.
Okay, New Mexico. Yeah.
Georgia.
Yeah.
Michigan.
Yeah.
Florida to some degree.
Yeah.
So they made it very, very attractive financially for a production company to go to those places.
And that would bring theirs. How many days a year would you say you were on the road with shooting, or how many productions would you have out of? I don't even want to say out of state because California is such a huge place. You're as gone as you're gone anywhere, staying in California. But how many days were you on the road, would you say, in your production life each year?
Well, again, my bread and butter were these 18-day wonders.
Yeah.
So I would do 3 or 4 a year, maybe.
Okay, that's a lot, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're about every quarter you're out on the road for a 3-week period.
Weeks, yeah.
Yeah, that is a lot. That is a lot. 12 weeks out of the year, I would say, is a
now compared to those people who would work on major motion pictures that would be gone,
for around
6
the
months,
world.
8 months on location. You know, this was manageable for me because, yes, I would be away from my family, but not for that really extended period of time.
Right.
And I still did do an awful lot of work in the LA area. You know, I'd be home every day, you know, sometimes pretty late
at 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah. And then there were those splits.
Okay. Tell me about that.
You'd start the week at, you know, early in the morning call, sometimes 5 a.m. call on a Monday morning. Sometimes it'd be as late as 7. And then as the week progressed, they would start to fold in the night work that needed to be done.
Okay.
So that as the week progressed, the calls would get a little bit later, and you'd work a little bit later so that you could have the dusk, and that you could have the early evening, and then you could have the night work. And so by Friday, you'd go to work at 2 in the afternoon.
Oh, boy.
And knock off at about 2 in the morning.
Oh, boy.
And then have to drive home, spend all day Saturday asleep.
Yeah.
And Sunday trying to do whatever you needed to do to get yourself ready
For
to
Monday.
be on the set Monday morning at
Oh
5
my
or 7
gosh.
or whatever.
And that was a pretty regular workflow, right? You know, because they're going to manage it that way, obviously. That's probably the most realistic way to do it.
Yeah.
So that was a very big part. And there were guys all over LA doing that, right? There were lots and lots of people doing that. What was the most memorable one you had? What was the most exciting one? Do you remember anything like that? Because I know in this industry, people ask me that too. And somebody asked me the other day of a post I did, I go, what was the name of the band? And I go, I don't even think I asked the name of the band.
Yeah.
Really, because it's not it's about what you're doing,
Yeah.
not about the end product. That's the producer's issue or
Right.
director's issue there. So what were some of them that really excited you?
Well, one of the ones that was most fun for me was a TV movie, a remake, directed by Arnold Schwarzenegger,
Okay.
Christmas in Connecticut.
Okay, I think I actually saw that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
Chris Christopherson, Tony Curtis was in that movie.
Tony Curtis. Wow, you got to work with Tony
Yeah,
Curtis.
yeah.
That is
What
so
a guy.
awesome.
What a guy.
Really?
Yeah.
Nice guy, huh?
Wonderful man.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That old Hollywood. That was, those were special people.
Yeah.
They really were. The Bob Hopes. Debbie Reynolds. I got to work with Debbie Reynolds one time. Or Mickey Rooney, who was quite a character.
Yeah, I worked on a TV show with him once.
Did you? Yeah, he's quite a character. But those were really special people
Yeah.
that came from a very special time.
Yeah.
And did that. Tony Curtis would have been a thrill to work with.
Yeah.
I mean that he's had a very storied career for sure. And you worked with Arnold Schwarzenegger as a director.
As a director.
He wasn't acting in it.
No. And he
Interesting.
was one of the best prepared directors I had worked with.
Is that right?
He was open to listening to people's suggestions, which I think is very important because sometimes,
You
somebody
get tunnel
can-
vision. Yeah.
But he had a very clear idea of what he wanted to accomplish and how it was going to be accomplished, and he set about it and did it.
Wow.
And I really respect him for that.
Yeah, kept the ball moving.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's really sort of it as a director. You know what I mean? Is you just like okay, starboard 2 degrees, right? You're able to just take the ship and keep it on course, keep it going in the right direction, and doing that. That's really great. Who else? Give me another one.
Oh, golly. Right off the top of my head,
I
can't
know what you mean,
think
brother.
of one right now.
I know what you mean.
Well, another Bill Bixby film. We were on location in Ottumwa, Iowa,
Okay.
with Roseanne Barr and
Interesting.
and Tom Arnold, doing a picture called "The Woman Who Loved Elvis" or something like that. I can't remember exactly.
Okay.
But again, because here I am working with somebody who is a consummate professional. And those are the kinds of jobs that really mean a lot to me.
Yeah.
Is someone who knows what they like, knows how they're going to get it, and just sets about getting it done.
Yeah. A real craftsman.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing a lot of people don't understand about our business too. It's not a bunch of people that are sitting around talking about the look and the feel and this. And of course that does occur. I don't want to give that. But it's about getting the job done. You've got 10 hours, you're on set. You got to make a decision. What's first, what's second, what's third? And the reason you make those decisions is based on the workflow that you have that day, the amount of crew, and how many pages you have to shoot,
You've got a budget and you've got a schedule.
Yeah.
Now, are you going to bring your show in on budget, on time,
Right.
or not?
Right.
Do you have the people surrounding you who are able to make that happen
Yes.
or not?
Right.
And there are always going to be curveballs.
Mm-hmm.
Something is going to happen that you never planned on. The weather, there's a power failure. I mean, all
of that.
sorts of things happen.
Yes.
You have to be ready.
Yes. And have a plan B and C, As Murphy was an optimist, right? Yeah. So now you're in that, you're doing that lifestyle. It's good for you. And so you've gone through the 80s fairly, it sounds like fairly happily, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about the 90s. On the 90s, then, it comes in, and there's sort of a change in the industry now. Not only is it 30 channels, it's probably 100 channels on cable now. And also the introduction of Betacam and more electronic style cameras, you know, which started out as almost like the toy that the consumer had, right? And then it grew up into a Sony Betacam that people were using, and I can, well, not can I only imagine it, I intersected the industry around the early 90s. So I heard the, you know, I would never shoot with that crap. You know what I mean? I said, oh, the color's all wrong, it's nothing, you know what I mean? And a really, I mean, significant resistance to it within the entertainment industry. Now, I intersected the business down here in Orange County where there was like full acceptance of it because economically it made so much more sense for editing, for review, for looking at the monitor, for, you know, everything you can think of made more sense to do corporate video like that, you know. But in that, and I'm just speaking to the world I was in now, the editing dollars were no different than the Hollywood editing dollars, right? So the whole budget was based on how many hours you could edit for. That was really the big money back in that day. You know, you didn't really, I remember the crew being under the editing budget, you know, the camera and the editing budget. That was like almost not even a consideration, you know. But tell me about the 90s, when you came in. How did the business start changing for you?
Well, for my experience and what I was doing, it just sort of kept on, that's pretty
Going
much the
on,
same track.
yeah.
Now, we did do a transition from 35 down to 16 millimeter
Okay,
for economic reasons.
yes.
And we had plenty of video assist, so yes, you could still be looking at the monitor. You could understand things and be able to tweak things because you did see a monitor.
That maybe you didn't have that opportunity
But you were still
before.
putting it on film.
Yes, yes, yes. And so with the advent of the 16, what started changing in the 90s for you? And I know there were some things, the Canadian treaty that we signed up there, which were for, and as we talked about this, a lot of people don't understand this. That was a treaty with the United States on cultural differences between the United States culture and Canadian culture, and that what the reasons for that is Canadian culture was getting polluted with American culture when, and I think we agree on this, we all know it's so the producers could have a cheaper place to shoot on the West Coast than you know, than in anything else that had to do with real cultural issues or anything. So how did that affect you?
Well, a lot of work started going up to Canada. And as an American citizen, I was not allowed to travel with my DP as his main lighting technician.
Right.
Because they would want to be hiring the Canadian technicians, and I get that.
Yeah.
But it meant that I was in a transition period where suddenly the DP who I was working very regularly with did 3 pictures in a row in Canada, and he was my main guy.
And yeah, that's a big impact.
Yeah.
That's a big impact. And what years were that? Do you recall that year? Or?
Mid-90s,
Mid-90s.
95,
Yeah.
96.
Yeah.
Then I hooked up with another group of guys, and I started doing a TV series.
Okay. What series?
Worked on Mike Hammer
Okay.
and Air America,
Okay.
and that pretty much wrapped up my career
Yeah. Yeah.
in lighting.
Yeah. And then from there, you went to Arri, right? You started working for Arri
Yeah.
in there. And I remember you telling, like, you knew John Gresh then, but he was working for a case company. He wasn't even working for Arri about that time.
Well, when I first met him, no.
Yeah, when you first met him.
Yeah.
When you first met him. No, that's so amazing to me. I love John Gresh. I love, and Mr. Davidson, what was
Charlie
it?
Davidson.
Charlie Davidson. I met him. What a gentleman he was. Yeah, I remember those days very well through Bill Hoshevnikov.
Yeah.
Who introduced me to you, and I think a lot of the other Arri guys, and that had. Tell me about that transition now, because I think that's probably the most difficult. Going from freelance crew, and now you're in really an international corporation, very organized international corporation. What was that transition like for you?
I was very nervous about it because I had been working in a way that I was in a different place for the most part every day.
Yeah, yeah.
Now I was going to work in the same place, at the same desk, with the same people, and I didn't know if I would actually be able to adapt to doing that. But Arri is such a wonderful company that it was easy.
Yeah, they made the transition
it was great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And a very well-respected company making incredibly good product.
Yeah, no, there's no number. I mean, Arri doesn't have a competitor in my mind in the industry, and that's not putting anybody else down. But it is a very unique company in the fact that they make cameras, and really, I mean, more than just state of the art. I think almost every Academy Award nominated movie is shot on Arri last year, and even the year before that, you know. And they make lighting, so I mean, it's like a total meshing of the industry right there. It's everything that you needed. And now, of course, what they've done with the Sky Panel, and of course the Arri Orbiter coming out, which is, you and I, we don't even want to get started on that because we only got a few minutes left. So that you know, we'll have to save that for another show. But you know, it's just incredible. It's incredible to hear that trajectory too. I really thank you for coming in here with that, because I think, and I came in at an older age. I mean, I was 40 when I started in this industry. And I think that a lot of people lose sight of those kind of trajectories, you know, about how the industry was, how it came about being, and where we're at now, which is, I think you will agree, a complete another universe from where you started out back in '68.
If someone can make and release a film with this,
yes,
we are in a very different place.
Yes, very different, very different. Ron, thank you so much, brother, for coming in. I really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you for inviting me, Burnie.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. And we'll be doing a lot more stuff here in the future, too, I think. So we got a few things going on.
Okay.
But that is it for today. So I'll tell you what, tune in next week, 2 o'clock, Burnie's Applebox. We'll have more for you. See you then. Cut. That's a wrap.